Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Progressive Christians Podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the storm the Capitol kind. So if you are curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I'm your host. And I want to first encourage you to rate, review, share, and subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you are using. Thank you all for those of you who have listened. Those of you who are listening, for rating and reviewing and letting other people know about us. In today's episode, we are going to be discussing the murder of the CEO from United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, and kind of just unpacking that and talking about a progressive Christian vision of what healthcare should look like. And yeah, it'll be an interesting conversation because there's a lot to unpack here. So I am joined by the full crew. Everybody is here today. Reverend Blair, Julia, and Wesley. How are y'all doing?
Hello.
We're good. I'm good.
Still kicking.
Still alive.
Still kicking.
How many days till Christmas? It's coming. End of the year.
I know.
End of the year push.
Too fast.
Blair, you've been, I know you were saying your daughter's been sick and you actually have United Healthcare, correct? So you've been in the hospital trying to get this stuff figured out. So
direct connection.
Direct.
Yeah, having small children is just like continuously having new versions of the plague every few weeks.
I believe it.
Sounds terrible. It's really
it's like it is literally like when people talk about weapons of mass destruction. I have thought like just literally like have sick children going to these places. Like you can wipe out communities because Isaiah's the same thing. I'm like, this is a weapon. This will hurt people.
Yeah. So we're passing around like some, what do they call it? Mycoplasma pneumonia. My son had it, then I had it, and now my 1-year-old has it. And I've never heard of it. It's an atypical pneumonia. But every time I think I've learned all of the childhood diseases, a new one emerges. It's so fun. And you know what? 10 days of sick leave, if you're lucky in this country, is what people get. But like, my kid's going to be sick for at least twice that. And then I'm also going to be sick. So, just like this is the life we live.
Living the healthcare dream, living the American healthcare dream. Oh, man. Yeah. So very direct tie-in to the conversation today. Before we go on, I do want to thank all of you who are just contacting us. Actually, a few people on Lift Up who've left some comments, who've DM'd us with different podcast topic ideas. Thank you all. One of the comments that I wanted to, at least I felt like was worthy to address, was about the ways in which we talk about race on this podcast. Now, again, this is the Progressive Christians Podcast, and you are listening to a podcast where you have 3 people of color and a white person. And so obviously race is going to come up when we talk about religion. Our experience of the world is filtered through the lens of our race and the way we're racialized. One of the things we're going to do in the next few weeks is record some episodes that kind of describe a bit about what we mean by progressive theology, like talk about how we read the Bible, how we understand sin, and other different categories that we think are important. And one of the ways I'm going to detail this more explicitly is the way in which I think and write about race. And so I want to just take a little moment of privilege to talk a little bit about my own expertise. And I say this as someone who is an expert in race and race theory, who has a PhD in religion, but one of my specializations within that PhD is on race and race theory. I have written and created what's called a theological anthropology, so a whole theological understanding of the concept of race. Probably, I would say, one of the top 3 most popular frameworks that's used behind J. Cameron Carter's framework for understanding race and Willie Jennings' understanding about race. So these are all just other nerdy theologians. I think Jay is at UC Santa Barbara and Willie Jennings is at Princeton. And I'm just at old Westwood United Methodist Church, so doing my thing. But representing.
Pastor scholar.
Well, that's it. Pastor scholar, definitely. That puts me in a unique space in with those 3. So I guess I want to say that I want to drop a little bit of the bona fides, as they say, to just let you all know, like, I know that sometimes when I am framing the conversation, I can forget that I have to talk about race and race thinking in a way that's perhaps more accessible to just people who don't have the same kind of education that I have. And so I want to acknowledge that and say that's something I'm definitely going to make sure I try to help us do better. But at the same time, we are going to talk about race in ways that may make people who are not people of color feel uncomfortable. And even if you are people of color, it may make you feel uncomfortable. But to be clear, when we're talking about race, particularly about white people, we're really talking about whiteness, right? Not necessarily white people. And we've talked about this numerous times, with the most pressing and obvious example of this is the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who is clearly not white, but has adopted all the principles and practices of whiteness as such. And so, one thing I want to invite you to do, if you're listening to this and you feel a little bit uncomfortable with what we're talking about, or you're like, oh, are they talking about me, or are they talking about other white people, is to recognize that there's a inherent flaw if you are a white person and you're listening to this, you say, well, I want to be treated as an individual, not as a collective group. That's a particular kind of privilege, to get to the point where you want to say something like, not all white people do this and not all white people do that. Like, people of color, we don't have the privilege of being looked at as individuals. Like, the way we are racialized, the way we're categorized, the way society functions is looking at Black people or people of color as a collective. This is why you have people of color who are disproportionately suffer from different kind of health crises, different interactions with police, all these things, right? They don't look at, say, okay, you're a person of color, you're a Black man, but you have a PhD, so clearly I'm going to treat you different than I treat other Black people. That's not how it works. People see you as a general group. And so it will be, in an ideal world, people will be seen as individuals, but we don't live in ideals. And so when we're talking about race, we have to talk about it in the pragmatic reality. And the pragmatic reality is that we're racialized as groups. So if we're talking about white people, or about whiteness, and you think to yourself, well, I don't fit into this category that they're describing, like, I'm not that kind of white person, you don't have to automatically assume that we're talking about you just because we're talking about white people as such, because you don't want to fall into the trap of denying the experience of people of color. And I do think that's often what happens when people have the argument or the phrasing of, well, not all white people. They're trying to say that, well, maybe it's not as bad as you think, or perhaps you're not thinking about the 5% of white people or 10% of white people who are not racist or don't do racist things. I think we have to recognize, when we're talking about, even the way I just said, do racist things, racism is a normal part of our society. Like, it's built into the structure of how our country was built. It's built into our politics. And same thing with patriarchy. These two things are the pillars of difference in the way in which our world is structured. And so to say something is racist, or somebody's done something racist, is not to say something that's radical. It's to say something that's very normal. The radical thing is to be anti-racist, to be a feminist, to actually resist patriarchy. And when you come to it with that understanding of recognizing that the progressive Christian thing to do is be anti-oppressive, it can help you be a little more open to some of the critiques and some of the conversations we're having. So if you are feeling uncomfortable, I invite you to turn inward, to do what contemplatives call a U-turn, to say, okay, what's going on within me? Why do I feel uncomfortable? And also continue to reach out. Like, I'm so open to getting emails and direct messages, just whatever way in which you can reach out to us on social media to let us know, because, I have done anti-racism training at large levels, like massive scales at universities, different corporations. So I know how to talk about it, I know how to do this, but this doesn't suggest that I still don't have more to learn in how I communicate or how we talk about race as such on this podcast. But I did want to say that because I think that's really, really important, and that matters to me. And honestly, Blair, as I said to you before, that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on the podcast, is because, I wanted to be able to talk about race in a way that didn't alienate white people. But even you have an expertise in talking about race that, when I taught at undergrad, I would tell my white students, growing up white in America, you're going to have, broadly speaking, an elementary level of understanding of race, because you don't have to think about race. You don't have to. Like, you can go into a space and automatically feel like you're supposed to be in that space. But as a person of color, you always think about your race wherever you are, because everybody else is thinking about it. And so, and I think it's to help people understand that, we're coming at this from different levels. Even if you're a well-educated person, a white person, if you haven't taken the time to read race theory and cultural studies, then you're probably still maybe got a junior high level. And so, yeah, Blair, you come to this podcast bringing knowledge about whiteness and race that most white people don't have.
And I'll name that the thing that's really helped me to learn about that is by being in relationship with people of color and listening to all y'all's experiences without defending myself. Right. And so I think that's the like, I will never be an expert in whiteness because I live in it. Right. Like I can't fully understand the air I breathe, but yeah, relationship with people of color. And if you are feeling like defensive about how we're talking about race or talking about whiteness or white people, that actually that is a space for growth for you. So we invite you into that growing space, or I invite you into that growing space. Yeah, we could have a whole other podcast episode about this, but
and we are. Like, and we are. But I really wanted to. It was a comment that I spent the last several days thinking about, and I wanted to at least name it and acknowledge it just in case, because again, people that have the courage to put that on the internet where other people can see it feel some kind of way about it, and I want to recognize that we have a growing number of loyal listeners, and to let people know we really do take your feedback seriously. I definitely do, probably more seriously than I necessarily should, but whatever, it is what it is. It's they tell you that when you're teaching to not look at the student evaluations, and like I fall into the trap all the time of
never read the reviews.
I know.
Stay away from the comments. Sometimes
know.
you need to be in there.
I know. I should know better.
But
that is a stance, right? Is like, we're not doing this to just talk to each other. Like, we are doing this podcast in order to talk with other people. And Dr. Carter and I are both educators. Like, we care about people learning and growing and developing. And, Julia and Wesley are both community leaders who cultivate community and spiritual belonging. Like, we want that to be the experience of people who are listening to this podcast. So I affirm you, Dr. Carter, in adding a community moment, if you will, to let people know, like, we really are listening. We really do want you to tell us both what you're gaining from this and also what you need from this, so that we can have as effective a community of growth as possible for all of us.
Definitely.
Amen. Wow.
Look at Wesley with the amen. All right, here we go.
Now let's talk about murder.
Now that's a transition. But yes, let us talk about murder. So as we all know,
not usually a topic in our podcast, but
not really. No.
It's
we were
more
originally
than murder. Let's talk about revolution.
Well, hey, and we're gonna get a little bit of that too. Originally, we were gonna discuss the movie about Bonhoeffer, but unfortunately, we weren't able to. Everybody wasn't able to see it because of they're not showing it in all the places in LA. So we're gonna move that to another time. This felt like a very pressing matter and conversation because everybody's been talking about the murder of Brian Thompson by Luigi Mangione, and just so there's a couple of things I want to at least, I guess, to frame it. Well, you know what? Even before I do that, let me just actually turn it over to y'all because I've been talking too much already. So, Wesley, just kind of how have you been processing this? Like, since it happened, what came up for you as you've been thinking about this particular this incident?
Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of potential layers because it's a complicated thing. I mean, I think learning that this gentleman comes from a wealthy family has me asking a lot of questions as to like what the nature of his resentment towards the healthcare industry is. Like, I think we all have a right to be frustrated with the for-profit reality of our healthcare system. And so it's understandable that folks are frustrated and that someone would have resentment towards it. But I have questions as to like what a specific relationship is. I think this story or this event brings up questions about like police incompetence and the amount of resources we put towards policing and whether or not they're actually doing what they need to be doing. We'll get into this, but like I was listening to an MSNBC report that said that Luigi wasn't even on the radar 24 hours before the tip. So it's like, here's this incredibly funded New York Police Department, and it was a tipster that connected them. Like, there would have been nothing beyond that. So I think this should demand questions of us as to where our public monies are going and are they doing the thing that we want them to do. I mean, there's there's this question about like the reaction online and whether or not that's real and representative of what the rest of the country is experiencing, whether or not the memes and all the fawning are real or whether it's just, I can't say this on the podcast because it's a bad word, but it's like, SH posting, whether it's just trolls on the internet or whether there's something real behind this. So yeah, I think this story captures a very real moment in our country, maybe potentially a shift, because this is what we're seeing online is not just, like a leftist perspective or something else. It's people who have more right-leaning ideologies also celebrating this, but also people who have left-leaning ideologies also celebrating this. We've learned that this person had a mixture of, conflicting realities, but maybe leaned a little more right. So like, what does it mean that all of these last the Trump assassination attempts, both of them coming from right-wing individuals, this individual taking sort of violent action, it all seems to be coming from one side. What are we doing as a society, or what does it say about society that one portion of our community are willing to take violent action? So there's a lot here that I think we can all pour over and spend hours on. But I think those are some of the things that have been sort of like going through my brain as the days have gone by.
Even the way he got the weapon is like a very wealthy. I mean, it's a ghost gun, which I had never even heard of. I was like, you can print a gun. I was like, what kind of
buy a 3D printer and all of the supplies? And I have to tell you, I don't know a single person who owns a 3D printer who financially should own a 3D printer.
Oh, wow. Well, okay.
It tends to be this like hobby that just like gobbles your money. So to not just have a 3D printer, but to have a 3D printer that can print like metallic and like all the components for a gun, like that's some expensive equipment.
Yeah, that's wild. That's wild.
So there's a lot here.
There's definitely a lot there. So, Julia, how have you been processing the this particular case?
I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. It is crazy to be these times. These are it's a wild time. Like I said, I'm observing what I consider to be, revolutionary acts by anyone who's read a book, who's looked at history, just even glanced at it. It feels clear that is that's where we're at. I'm fascinated by the media. I'm fascinated by the fact that everyone understands, right? Like, it seems like everyone's like, oh, I mean, whether some people think it's good or bad, like, who knows? I don't even think it's good or bad. I mean, it's all both. But the people that don't understand, there are some people, like, I look at the media and they're like, I can't believe this. I can't believe the reaction. And I'm like, you can't. The contrast is so striking to me that the majority of people get it and the people that don't, and the people that don't, they're the ones who are in the media, and they are genuinely and sincerely confounded by the fact that the rest of us are like,
I think it really is representative of, I know we had talked about this earlier, like class solidarity, the ways in which people, and that's what's interesting about this particular case is Luigi comes from money, and yet had some experiences. We assume there's a lot of stuff going on online right now that we don't necessarily know, but the assumption is that he had a accident from surfing and he has back pain, which started this process. But it seems as though when you actually follow his trail, like what he's been writing and thinking about and posting about with respect to his things online, you can see he's been critiquing oligarchs, not capitalism, but literally just like oligarchs is a way to frame it, like critiquing people who have amassed just ridiculous amounts of money. Because there's like wealthy people, and then there's just like the 1% that's just like has a level of money that none of us.
It's literally incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible. Like, it's our brains can't comprehend it, and like even the people who are fortunate enough to not fully understand the reasoning behind an act like this are so far away from being in that 1%, but they don't even know.
But it's also not just that they're insanely wealthy. It's how they made this wealth.
Well, it's
on the backs of people and our health and well-being. So it's
like they make wealth. They work hard for it. Oh, they work hard for it and they earned it. This is sarcasm. This
100%.
Like
sarcasm.
Like,
so Blair,
I've genuinely not seen anybody who is besides people who are like, I guess, Fox News pundits who are like defending billionaires all the time, I've seen very few people not understand why someone would be driven to murder because of the healthcare industry in this country.
What surprised me is how the media was surprised, I should say. I think they understand why a CEO from a healthcare industry could be murdered. I think they were surprised by how people's online response and just how they're like very like, yeah, okay, I get it. Like, and nobody was like, oh, I feel bad for the guy. So there's a couple things I want to do before we get too far. I want to frame a little bit about who Luigi was. And then I want to say, when we get to a point, I'll make sure I want to say some stuff about the person, Brian, who he murdered, because the way he's been represented in the media definitely is not an accurate portrayal of him or his company. So Mangione comes from a wealthy family, a real estate family in the Baltimore area. He's always attended wealthy schools, went to private schools. He was the high school valedictorian. He attended University of Pennsylvania. He graduated with a bachelor's and master's degree. He is, I think, electrical and computer engineering. He taught himself coding. Like he's a very, very intelligent person. Like he comes across very, very intelligent. One of the things that I wanted to let our listeners know is he did post online about essentially, like I said, like oligarchs and different frames of capitalism. And one of the things he posted was he was clearly an avid reader, and he would posted on Goodreads on the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski's anti-technology manifesto. Mangione called, so this is an article I'm reading from MSNBC. It says, Mangione called Kaczynski's actions those of an extreme political revolutionary and quoted a take he said he had seen online. When all other forms of communication fail, violence is necessary to survive. You may not like his methods, but to see things from his perspective, it's not terrorism, it's war and revolution. These companies don't care about you or your kids or your grandkids. They have zero qualms about burning down the planet for a buck. So why should we have any qualms about burning them down to survive? And I mean, you read that and you're just like, okay. I mean, where's the lie? You know what I'm saying? Like, where's the lie? You're just
There's
like,
an acknowledgement of the system we exist in.
Yeah.
All I hear is reality. I just hear him making honest observations.
We're watching Succession right now. I've never watched it before, but one of the things that comes up in that show, which is a TV show about a billionaire family and how they maintain power and how they make decisions. And one of the things they say about bad situations is NRPI, no real persons involved. And that is literally one of the ways that corporations talk about disaster, even when it involves death of individuals, that if depending on the quote unquote value of those individuals, they might deem a tragedy NRPI, no real persons involved. And I just like when I don't, well, okay, I was about to say I don't condone murder, but I think I'm really having to reflect on that because of this reality, right? Of like, is it murder or is it warfare? And is there such a thing as just war?
Yeah,
that
that's
is the question I'm asking myself.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. And I think the last quote that I want to read about Luigi, that what he said when he was getting or not as he was getting arrested, but when he was getting led into the Blair County, Pennsylvania courtroom, he shouted, "It's completely out of touch and an insult to the intelligence of the American people and their lived experience." And it's just like. I mean, he is not a crazy person. You know what I'm saying? Like he's not like, this person is like, he has well thought out why this in his mind, he was doing something that in his mind that needed to happen. Again, I want to say, I don't think it needed to happen, but in his mind, he's like, this is revenge. This is, again, as Blair said, war. It's, he felt like it was a proportionate response. I guess maybe I'll say that. He felt like it was a proportionate response to the violence being committed by the healthcare industry. And that is, that's wild, right?
A take I
wild.
appreciated on Blue Sky was someone saying, take what you will about murder, right? Like if we don't want violence in an ideal world. However, there is something to be said about a disgruntled young white man actually directing his anger and violence at the source of his suffering rather than at women and children and
queer people, right?
Right? Like Luigi Mangione knew who was causing his suffering and took the violence to the appropriate place.
Which is the
whether
most
or not we
terrifying
agree violence
thing.
should have happened. But
this to me is the most effective. Could be, in theory. I mean, Anthem was about anesthesia that they were going to stop insuring, and they
anesthesia
switched
by time. Yeah.
And they switched it up. They changed their minds. Now, I fully believe that they will come back with that policy in a few months, but like for the immediate future, Luigi's actions have produced a result. They have,
like there's been a change. There's been a change in policy in light of somebody of being afraid of getting murdered, and I think. Go ahead, Blair.
I was just gonna add some context for me. Like one of the ways I contribute to my family is I don't ever let us pay the full price of a medical bill ever, because I know that all of those numbers are made up, and I don't ever accept a rejection from my insurance company. I have enough medical knowledge to know what coding is, to know diagnostic words. Like I know the catchphrases. I've read the laws. I know what surprise billing is. Like I have the ability to call and get on the phone with the insurance company and basically back them into a corner rhetorically to make sure that they pay my bills. But the number of hours I have to spend doing that is exhausting. Now, I've saved my family literally thousands of dollars because we don't have it, right? I can't go out and make that money right now in my phase of life, but I can keep us from having to pay it to a corporation that doesn't give two cracks about my children and my health. So I am like very experienced at, I wish it was a job to like, I mean, I guess it is medical billers. Like if I worked for a doctor's office, right, to get insurance companies to pay out. But the number of times I have had to call insurance companies to get them to just do their jobs and uphold the policy that I have is insane. And so it's almost a joke in my house that like my favorite thing to do is call and yell at medical insurance companies. But my husband walked in and looks at his phone. He goes, a CEO of a healthcare company was just murdered in broad daylight in Manhattan. And I said, well, I don't have to question what the motive is. Like I am honestly unsurprised and kind of surprised it took this long because of just how corrupt this system has become, where they don't even have to do the job they've contracted to do unless you call and use your own time to force them to do it. And that is like a common, like it doesn't matter how much money you have. The difference is, do you have the money to not care about it? And there are very few people in this country who actually have enough money to not care about how supremely rigged our medical billing system is.
Blair, I literally thought that when your husband came in and said there's a CEO was murdered in New York for healthcare, if in front of you were like, well, I was in LA. Like I wasn't even in
It wasn't me.
It wasn't me, but I understand why. I understand. Like I was, he was like shocked, and I was like, I am not shocked at all. I'm not shocked. I am not surprised. Like the thing I'm surprised about is that it took this long for someone to be driven to this, because people die waiting for health insurance companies to do the job they have been paid to do. And if there is one thing that drives me crazy in society, it's people not doing their own jobs. I hate when I have to do other people's jobs for them.
But this is the thing, is like their job is not to care for the people. Their job is to make as much, to maximize their profit for their shareholders. That man was shot outside of his shareholder meeting where he was on his way to discuss how well he's done for the company and how high their profits are because so many people have died. And then they stepped over his body and went in there and had the meeting on time. It is.
Yeah.
I worked in healthcare for a few years. And the thing that I learned was that if you don't want your loved one to die, if someone that you love is sick or unwell, the only way you can save their life is by spending hours, a full-time job, sitting on the phone fighting with insurance companies.
Yep.
The office that I worked for gave care to people who were underinsured, people who don't have great insurance. And there was an entire team of 60 people whose sole job it was to sit on the phone every day and fight to get the claims paid. That was their entire job.
Yeah. I mean, because like you said, Julia, like, especially for companies that are on the stock exchange, they have a responsibility to make money for shareholders. And one of the ways that you can do that is paying fewer claims. So you're incentivized to not do the thing that you're supposed to be providing a service for. So,
yeah, no, I think all of you are making such good points, and I think this gets to what I wanted to say briefly about the media's coverage of Brian Thompson before we move into talking about talking about this theologically, like where do we see progressive Christian vision? Like what would we argue for the creation of? Because clearly a capitalist system where you are incentivized to deny people care is not only is it like not Christian, I would argue it's not any of the Abrahamic traditions. It's actually not effective or good for the country from like literally like you need a community of people. You need to, like people to be healthy to actually like go to work and like do capitalism. Like literally like to do capitalism. Like people need, and so I'm like, this undermines everybody's ability to do. This is like bad capitalism. Like that's what frustrates me. And like this happens so my wife is a veterinary oncologist, and this happens so often at her job where like because again, so it's medical adjacent, it's medical, right? But it's non-human animals. And they make these decisions that I'm like, you're losing money. Like you're doing capitalism wrong by how they don't want to pay their staff members enough so they lose good staff. So then animals end up getting hurt and dying. I mean, it's very parallel to what happens to humans. And then you end up getting sued and you lose money when you could have made more money had you just paid your staff an extra $2 an hour or something like that, right? Like simple things like that didn't make any sense. And I'm reminded of when Gabrielle was in labor and how we had to, because I don't know anything I'm a doctor of words. I know nothing about like actual medicine. And so I'm very well educated, but I went to this room and, she's, trying to have Isaiah, and it's clearly something is wrong because she's been in labor pushing for a long time and he's not descending. And she had been in labor for a couple of days. It was just really weird. And it took us essentially her like taking enough of drugs through an IV in addition to the drug she had from epidural to have enough awareness to say something is wrong. You need to have an actual doctor come in, because all that our medical insurance at the time wanted to cover was a midwife. And when the doctor he comes in, takes like 2 minutes, and like he looks at her, looks at the situation room, one might say, and he's like, all right, I have to go get a team of people and I gotta come right back. Now when I hear team of people, I'm like, oh, this is like for real. Like this is for real. You gotta come back with a team of people. He's like, I want you to push, but not. He's like, push as much as you have to, but don't push anymore. Literally telling her not to push anymore. Because he has to come in and she has to have like emergency stuff happen. My son's neck was broken when he was born, all this other kind of crazy stuff. And the worst part is the nurses and the midwife was telling my wife that, like, essentially not believing her when she was saying she's in pain. They were just like, oh, you're not, it doesn't hurt that bad. Like you're just exaggerating the pain. It's wild, but it's all because it costs more money to have this whole other team to come in and have this other procedure that needed to happen that ultimately, like Isaiah would have suffocated essentially, because the cord was around his neck. And that, anyway, it's all, y'all know how big my son's head is and how tiny my wife is.
Big, beautiful brains. Well, I mean, we have the worst maternal death rate in the developed world.
Yeah.
And these are the reasons why. We have the worst healthcare. We spend the most money.
We spend the most money,
and we have the worst healthcare in the developed world. I say this all the time. We live in the wealthiest nation that has ever existed in human history. What is even the point? What's the point?
I mean,
what's the point?
The point for the rich people.
Yeah. The people making decisions. It always does come back to money in American society. there isn't, like you said, they held the shareholder meeting. They didn't step over his literal body, but they stepped over the bloodstain to go in and have the shareholder meeting, or at least start it. And that is an entire class of people who consider the rest of us NRPI.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The only way this exists is because there is a class of people in this country who consider the rest of us to be less than human.
Yep.
That's the only way this can exist, because they are making choices that they know are killing people, bankrupting people, creating massive amounts of suffering and trauma. And they're still doing it and making it worse because it puts a few more $100 in their bank account at the end of the month.
But what's crazy,
you have to consider other human beings as not human being. Like, I don't know how else you participate in that.
but not just us, but also him. Like once he was dead, he's just another. They literally they had someone new in there 24 hours later. Like it's not just us, it's also them. Like it's also their peers. It's also the people that are in the room with them. Like
right, because as soon as you become disabled, right? As soon as you can no longer participate in the quote unquote like production class, who aren't the people producing anything. They're sitting in boardrooms trying to decide
retreats, corporate retreats.
How much violence. Basically, the question is how much violence is acceptable for us to make more money? Like, where is the limit of our violence? And that's why, right? That's why I'm like leaning towards like maybe a violent reaction is appropriate, because really what they're doing is sitting in boardrooms trying to decide the limits of their violence towards society. And it's about dang time we started pushing back on that.
But I don't think of it out as being appropriate or not. It just, this is what happens. Like, this is what it leads to. This is how it goes.
Can you hear the people sing? I shouldn't sing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you did it great right there. So
it's beautiful.
For those of you who don't know, that's a little snippet of Les Mis, which I totally like. This definitely has a lot of Les Mis undertones. You know what I'm saying? This is revolutionary. But so before we do need to talk about violence, because that's really important. And Blair, you're leading us right into the conversation around theology, which is like the dehumanization of what's happening. But I want to say just briefly about Thompson, because people are about essentially the company, because I think the company is not being portrayed accurately, and he's definitely not being portrayed accurately. So within the media is what I mean. So in May, Hollywood Firefighters Pension Fund filed a lawsuit accusing Thompson of insider trading and fraud. According to the lawsuit, Thompson had sold $15 million in personally held company stock during a Justice Department antitrust investigation into United Healthcare, knowledge of which he failed to disclose. When the news of the investigation broke, it wiped out nearly $25 billion in shareholder value, right? So that's one thing that he's done that's just clearly like illegal, evil, and corrupt. Then you have the reported sale of $1.5 million in stock on the same day that the company suffered a ransomware attack that erased $46 billion in market cap. And then lastly, is you find out that him and a bunch of people on his board are being sued for $121 million for dumping the stock that we talked about earlier, like the total stock. And so like clearly it's what we said earlier, like they are trying to find ways not only to not pay people, but to leverage stocks in such a way to essentially enrich themselves. And that's the profit motive of healthcare. And so
morally bankrupt individual. He had
I actually love that he lost them so much money. I love that.
Well, and United Healthcare denies claims at twice the rate of any other healthcare insurer in the United States. Yes. Twice the rate. And there was someone quoted who used to work as a claims adjuster who has named that they were instructed to deny every third or fourth claim just because. Because what it then requires is whoever has the claim denied has to get on the phone for hours and hours and hours and do their jobs for them. And they're just banking on people not doing that. And so it's a company policy to deny claims at twice the rate of any other company. So yeah, I mean, it's not that this man was just like an innocent man doing his job. He knew what he was doing. He was making choices that he knew were harming people to enrich himself.
He's a crook.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what was on the bullet casings? It was like deny,
defend,
depose.
Deny, defend, depose.
Yeah. I mean, I was just like, oof. Yeah. So, well, all right. So now we went through the...
Yeah, what about violence? Let's talk about violence.
going through the rationalization around why this might happen. And essentially, I think for any of us who've been able to travel to so many countries, I'm talking about
Anywhere
like
else?
I mean, literally, for those of you
Anywhere.
listening, if you have not been to, you in your brain, you're like, oh, maybe it's just Europe. No, Asia,
Anywhere.
universal healthcare. My friends that live in South Africa, Kenya, universal healthcare. I'm like, it's just like this is a
South and
uniquely
Central
United
America.
States
Yeah.
way of doing
Everywhere else.
it's really tied, and it's really really tied into the lobbying of the American Medical Association, which also is deeply racist, quite honestly. The reason we don't have universal health care is because
Right.
of racism and not wanting to cover Black people for the idea that we get, are more disease ridden and more sick or whatever. The reason we don't have so many things in this country have to do with racism, which is just
if Black people have to have it, then no one should have it.
yeah, in terms of universal public goods. And if you're curious about that, there's this, what's the name of the book? It's escaped me right now. I'm so it'll come to me.
I'm gonna look it up, but it's about why we don't have any public pools.
Yeah.
I loved this book. It's a sociology economic text.
Yeah, that book you're referring to is the drain pools. The reason I think this is a theological argument, it is in part because of what Blair said earlier about the way in which you have to not only look at other people as less than human to dehumanize them, but also to Julia's point that in the process of dehumanizing others, you ultimately devalue your own humanity, such that even when one of your people die, you're just like, well, I guess we still gotta have the meeting. You don't go home. I mean, you think they might have canceled the meeting just to,
They should have.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Well,
it's
I think
wild.
they did in it. I think someone in it was like, "Isn't this in poor taste?" And so then they left. But they started the meeting right on time. They did
Still,
end it early, which I guess is, I don't know.
That's wild. That's wild.
It's too late. You did it wrong.
And so,
The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. That's the book we were thinking
The Sum of Us, yeah. And I think that book does such a great job. But basically, the subtitle of that book is how racism costs everyone, basically. And I think it's so good. And it talks about essentially, especially if you're poor and from the South, it just has totally the people who tend to vote for policies that are racialized are the ones that actually suffer the most from those policies that they're voting for. It's a whole trick.
Well, and this it ties back to the people are saying they voted for Donald Trump this round because he promised to get rid of Obamacare, and then you explain to them that that's the Affordable Care Act, and they say, wait, I can't lose the Affordable Care Act. I have diabetes. I need my health insurance, or my mom has diabetes, or my uncle has cancer, and suddenly they realize they voted against access to a broken system, but the only access they have, and that is that is a tool of class warfare to convince poor people that systems that actually benefit them are things that they should not support.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and it's it's sad that people keep on for the okie doke, but here we are. I think to the point that y'all keep raising that we've come back to is how do we feel about this murder? And it's, as Blair said, it's I think for many of us it is complicated because I don't want to agree with it, but I understand. And I think for me, it brought up the work of Walter Wink, and he's a biblical studies scholar, theologian. The book I'm actually referring to, it's called Engaging the Powers, Discernment and Resistance in a World of Domination. It's an older book, but it's an excellent book. And he writes about this thing called the myth of redemptive violence. And in that chapter, because I think it's the first or second chapter in this book, he quotes Leviticus 24:17-21, which is basically the passage that says an eye for an eye. It says, if anyone kills another person, they must be executed. That's where you get the eye for an eye passage that Jesus critiques in the New Testament, right? And so what Wink is arguing for, he says essentially the myth of redemptive violence is the very foundation of the laws of proportional justice that the ancient Israelite community were told to practice. And so what he means by redemptive violence is the idea that somehow justice, goodness, and peace can be brought about through violence. It's the idea that violence has redeeming qualities, the idea that violence can in fact be good if it's done by a certain kind of person, by good people in certain ways, right? And in this sense, he would argue that violence can be can be salvific if it's done by the right people and for the right reasons. And that's a slippery slope, because the myth that it emerges from is from its mythic beginnings. He talks about, in ancient Near Eastern culture, so in Babylonian religion, their creation myths were inherently violent. It was always a male god essentially tearing apart a female god and creating the earth out of the female god. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, that seems violent. And well, most of the creation myths that emerge out of that period of human history, this is early, what we would call the kind of religions that we practice today, the Abrahamic traditions, come out of this particular kind of space.
Ancient Near Eastern religions.
Yeah. And this is how Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 were a fundamental contrast to that. Like the ancient Israelite, religious traditions were totally radically different, where it's much more ordered, structured, not inherently violent, actually about a kind of love and growth. So it pushes back on those kind of fundamental assumptions of creation that you find in Greek creation myths and Egyptian creation myths and Celtic creation myths, or in Hindu creation myths. All these are violent. And so what Wink does, he talks about how you see that kind of violent myth, this idea that violence can be redemptive, not only in religion, but also in Christianity, as we see, because it was in Leviticus and Jesus is critiquing it in New Testament. But we see it in contemporary society with, Wesley, you talk about propaganda. You talked about it earlier, about how we think we could give cops all this money because we have this idea, because through television, through things like Law and Order, that cops are actually good at their jobs. If we give them money, they're actually going to solve crimes.
Or that the threat of violence will prevent crime, right? That's a myth. The threat
100%.
of violence does not prevent crime.
100%.
Because crime overwhelmingly occurs because of poverty and inequality, not because of malice, right? So violence does not prevent people from starving. If you are starving, you're going to do what you have to do to feed your kids. And no matter what violence is going to be put against you, it's not going to change your economic situation, and you're going to do what you have to do. So that's where I think the myth is that we need violence for new creation, but also that we need violence to prevent violence. And that's just not the truth, actually. We need care and compassion. That's how you prevent violence. Sorry, I probably jumped 2 steps ahead of you, Dr. Carter. You were really on a roll with me.
No. I was you went right to it.
I was like, let's get there.
Well, no, because you're right. You took us where I wanted us to go, because I thought what Wesley, as soon as you said in the beginning about the money we spend on police, and I already went to this part of where I knew it wanted to take us today. I was like, it's all wrapped up in that myth, the idea that that somehow, again, violence can prevent violence, and some part of us feels that that's true. I think some part of human nature, or at least the way in which we're socialized, maybe not human nature, the way in which we're socialized, we've been taught to believe that there is a certain kind of violence that can be proportionate and justified, and that it'll lead to a positive outcome. And what Wink is basically saying, that violence never leads to a positive outcome. You may need to be violent to protect yourself because someone's trying to harm you. And the positive outcome may be that you don't die, but it's not going to create another round of positive outcomes with respect to what happens in consequence of that. It doesn't. And that's hard for us to believe when we live in a society that is premised on, Puritan religion that's based on a carceral punishment framework, that if you punish people, they'll stop sinning. If you punish people, they'll stop doing this. And that kind of punishment does not lead to transformation. That's fundamentally it.
Nope.
So much of it also, I think, has to do with the societal structure of domination that is inherent in patriarchal structures. That's obviously inherent. That it's not just, it's a specific type of violence, right? Violence done by the state is considered positive. Violence Jordan Neely was just acquitted. It's totally fine that he just strangled someone on the subway in front of everyone. So some violence is acceptable. Police violence is acceptable, because that is in the same way that for so many years, the idea of Tucker Carlson's weird rant at that rally about how, you just need to spank, the implication of violence done by a father, that's okay. It's
Yeah,
corporate violence is acceptable.
Yeah, corporate violence is acceptable. Violence done to women is acceptable. I mean, we look at the rates of domestic violence in this country. The violence done to people is violence done to marginalized groups by those deemed to, or those society deems to have power over them, is seen as okay. Basically.
Which is why Luigi is so wild.
NRPI, no real persons involved.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think it's important for us to understand from a Christian perspective where this comes from within our tradition. And this is where Blair, I do think that, like, I am a person who strives to be pacifist. That's what I would say. Like, I did not grow up pacifist. I did not think about being a pacifist until I not only became a clergy person, but really studied the civil rights movement and understood why they had to do what they had to do and why it worked. And I think Cesar Chavez said it the best. He was like, I'm a violent person who's trying to be nonviolent. And I feel like that probably was
pacifist, or are you actively nonviolent?
I'm
because they're
different. They are
Being
different.
Pacifist is saying I choose to disengage. I choose not to engage. Whereas being actively nonviolent means putting yourself in the middle of the violence and allowing, if that means the brutality hits you, it hits you. But active nonviolence is calling on the higher recognition that humanity would recognize humanity, and that might create the end of the violent system and cycle.
I mean, it's nonviolent resistance. That's a more accurate representation. But even that's hard. I mean, it's hard to
Walter
think.
Wink also has a book called Jesus and the Third Way, which is about this idea of active nonviolence.
Yeah. No,
is it?
Go ahead, Julia.
How effective is it?
It is effective. It is. I actually, let me.
I know that things are better now than they were. I would much rather do this than Jim Crow. Absolutely. But like, really.
I don't disagree with the critique, Julia. I want to know, while Dr. Carter pulls a book off his shelf, where were you going with, you said this is why Luigi is so interesting. Can you?
Oh, well, because he is.
Circle back to that.
He is in that. Like, he is a wealthy, white, well-educated man, which I think is more dangerous than for the system. I don't know if how I think that a lot of like what these people need is to be bullied.
Well, so, I mean, I think what you're saying is like, you were trying to figure out like what level of suffering has he experienced that caused him to be radicalized?
That's a question that I had for sure.
Right? Or Wesley was asking that, right? Like, this man has no reason, from what we've read of him, to have been radicalized in this way and pushed to this level of violence. So what
but see,
level of suffering did he experience? Or
I think that it matters, but also maybe it doesn't, because I think that there's something to be said for not having to personally experience the suffering to be able to like
because the myth of redemptive violence is dumb. Nobody should have to suffer. We should just be able to take care of each other. The suffering is not required. The sacrifice is not required.
Right. And we can take care of each other. We can. We just choose not to because of money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Capital, greed, selfishness.
Profit over people.
Sin, one might say, actually. But anyway, or I get mammon, as the was it the King James? I do actually want to pull it back to Scripture. So this is where I do want to talk about Jesus making the same case, right? And when he's on a Sermon on the Mount and he's critiquing the same law that we read in Leviticus, where he says, I'm looking at Matthew 5. You have heard it was said that those who lived long ago don't commit murder. All who commit murder will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you, those who are angry in a brother or sister will be in danger of judgment. So basically talks about like an eye for an eye doesn't work, right? Like you can't do that. I'm sorry, that was reading the wrong one. Law of retaliation. I'm sorry, verse 38. You've heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you that you must not oppose those who want to hurt you. And this is where it gets into the stuff that Walter Wink is talking about, the third way. If people slap you on your right cheek, you must turn to the left, et cetera, et cetera. He's talking about nonviolent resistance, not actually just being passive and resisting nonviolently using the methods of early Middle Eastern tactics. And so I think when we're talking about this with respect to violence, I think you have a clear argument from our perspective that violence is understandable, but not right. Now, with respect to framing what a new vision of healthcare looks like, I think that's something that we as progressive Christians need to articulate. And perhaps this might be one of those things we actually have solidarity with conservatives who are now maybe starting to be, but more like the polling says that all people want universal health care, right? But like at the same time, polling talks about people like their private health insurance. People don't want to have Obamacare or whatever
I
because,
think people want affordable, high quality healthcare. And we've created an ideology where there is a certain segment of society that thinks that can't be done if it's run by the government. And so I don't know that there's a majority of people who say they want centralized or unified healthcare. Or maybe that is the polls. I'm not sure which poll you're looking at, but I do think that there is solidarity across ideological difference here, where we all want affordable access to high quality healthcare. We all want it. And someone mentioned, is this, perhaps this flash of violence becomes the Me Too moment for healthcare in the United States. And I wish it didn't have, I wish violence wasn't necessary, but I sure as heck hope that's the case because we're all suffering.
No, I agree. I want to ask Wesley real quick because I know, Wesley, you got to dip out in a minute because we had to record early because you have a meeting to go to. I guess if you're thinking about what kind of healthcare system do you believe we should have that you think is informed by your own particular kind of moral framework? Like, what does it look like for you?
I mean, a universal healthcare system where people don't have to think about putting their own well-being on hold because they don't have the money or because they're not employed with a company that provides adequate or even any healthcare system. So many of the people that are stuck in bad jobs are there because of quote unquote the benefits, because they can't go elsewhere because healthcare is such an important reality of our everyday life. So yeah, one that isn't, I don't even care if wealthy people have access to it. They should. Everyone should have basic care and access to the treatments that they need to keep living, because what we've seen and what we'll continue to see is that there isn't an amount of money that will prevent someone from trying to stay alive. There isn't a cost that they won't incur in order to keep living. And so knowing that everyone wants to stay alive, we should have structures that allow people to engage with healthcare systems that don't bankrupt them, that don't have them spending hours and hours trying to get a fair deal. One that just says, look, you have a concern, you have a healthcare reality that you need to take care of. We got you. You're a human being and we care about your flourishing.
That's perfect. And with that, I know you got to get going. So we will catch you later, Wesley. And I think actually Wesley leads into the exact point I wanted to make from like how I would argue this is deeply Christian, right? If you believe all human beings are created in the image of God, right? If you believe that we are called to like love our neighbor, if you believe what Jesus is saying in Matthew 25, he's like, what you do to the least of these, you do to me. These are all the ways in which you have the moral framework to actually care for people. Like that is so obviously Christian. It frustrates me when I talk to people of faith who struggle to understand the importance of universal health care and how that is a extremely Christian position. Like I don't understand how another position can be understood to be Christian.
I think in that same line of thinking, like it is my faith, my Christian faith, that leads me to believe that there are just certain things that should not be for profit.
Mm.
And to me, that's like food, water, housing, and healthcare. That these things ultimately should not, you can't seek profit and also allow a society to thrive or even just have basic dignity if profit is involved.
I mean, I agree. I think that this is when you do that, you off the bat make it more difficult. You make it more challenging for people to do the right thing because you're incentivizing them ultimately
to do the wrong thing.
To dehumanize people. Yeah, 100%.
And that, like Wesley said, people will spend anything to stay alive. And so to say like, oh, if they'll spend anything, we should charge them as much as possible is like a wild way to run a society.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the best way to run healthcare, one might say. I mean,
That's crazy.
like something that should be understood as the universal basic right, I would argue.
Well, the only way that I can start to conceive of how someone might understand themselves to be a Christian and still oppose universal health care or universal housing or free lunches for kids. It all ties back to this corrupt and broken theology that God is the one who causes suffering, and that the level of your suffering is a reflection of the level of your blessedness. And if you genuinely believe that God is the one who causes suffering, rather than suffering being the result of sin, whether that's individual or systemic, then you think people who get sick are people who deserve to get sick. And you think people who have good healthcare are people who deserve to have good healthcare because God has positioned them that way. I mean, I really do think the only way it works is if you come back to that theology of sort of predestination, preordination, that like God has made all of these decisions, both positive and negative. I don't live in that theology. I don't think God causes suffering. I don't think God is abusive. I think God is the one who creates flourishing and life and abundance and love and compassion, and that when we suffer, it is because we resist those things. Someone, somewhere has resisted those things, and then it has caused suffering, if not to them, then to others. But I think that's where the breakdown happens, is in the theology of what do you believe God does in the world. And
no, I think that's such a great point, Blair. Actually,
Yeah.
I think that really helps me understand how some people could think that, because in my head I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. But if you believe that you're suffering, your lack of healthcare, your lack of housing, all these other all these things are because of your own choice,
Relationship with
bad
God.
choices, yeah,
Right.
then yeah,
your
you're gonna
failure of faithfulness, or the
Yeah.
choice of God, or the reflection of God's opinion about you.
yeah, and that's
Even
just
down to like,
yeah.
okay, well, if you need better health insurance, then you should get a better job, without realizing that there are systemic barriers for people to get a quote unquote better job. Like, but that, I do think that is a system of morality that exists within Christian theology and Christian community that people cling to. And there's a lot of different reasons they cling to it. But if that's the position you hold, I do understand why you can think that there is such a thing as individual responsibility for healthcare. But I think you can only hold that view if you are isolated within communities that also hold that view.
How does that then reckon with the idea of it even of being for profit? Because those are two very different things. Like, to me, the fact that it's for profit, like, it makes it a different thing entirely.
I'm trying to like put my head into a different headspace, right? And to think, and I would guess that those individuals would say, well, if those people are profiting, it's because they have made smart decisions, and
God
why
favors
not
them.
profit? Yeah, why not profit? That's the evidence of their favor. That's the evidence of their salvation.
Blair,
And if God wanted people to be saved, God would do what was necessary.
That is wild. I
think it's broken, right? I don't think that's the God of Scripture. I don't think that's the God of community. I don't think that's the God of our Christian tradition. But I do think that's the worldview, like an actually surprising amount of people are operating out of in this country.
And to be clear, just to explain why that is incorrect, is really reliant on a God that is a carceral, punishment-oriented God that they are pulling from various strands of the way God is described in the Hebrew Bible. Like, that's not the God that we see in Jesus, right? That's not even the way in which you hear the New Testament prophets talk about God. Like, that's not the way they talk about God. However, when the ancient Israelite community are trying to understand why they've suffered throughout their experience, they look back and say, well, what did we do to cause this to happen? And they're trying to make sense of it, and they're trying to rationalize it. And there is this push and pull between, did we do something? Why did this happen? Oh, you didn't love me the way you're supposed to love me, so this is why this happened. There's always this way in which Scripture is speaking to itself. And when we understand, again, we're going to do an episode on how to read the Bible at some point. We need to do that. That it's an edited volume, you can see how people may glean these aspects of God. But ultimately, it glean these aspects of God to create a God that is in the vision of what Blair described. But ultimately, what that vision is created to support capitalism. Like, really.
It's a prosperity gospel.
Yeah,
it's a
prosperity
gospel that
yeah.
enriches some and damns others.
Yeah. That's
convinces those that are damned that it is their fault.
Yep.
it convinces everyone that it's the people that are damned, that it's their fault. It also convinces the people who prosper.
But I mean, the book of Job alone, where God causes Job to suffer and literally lose everything, and Job never gives up his faith in God. That book alone should put an end to the concept of redemptive suffering and the prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
I agree. I mean, I love the end of that book, man, because that's where God gets like it's fit. Yeah. Anyway, that's another podcast episode, because that's like one of my favorite books. But we've gone a long time, so I want to wrap up. And I think the main thing I want to make sure that people get from this episode is to not only see how arguing for something like, I mean, personally, I would argue for something like Pete Buttigieg, his healthcare plan that was like Medicare for all who want it. Like, I still wish to me, he's like the ideal in so many ways to be president. Like, he's so smart. He can be
sort of like the British system, where it's like the standard is national healthcare, but if you want to purchase individual private insurance, you can.
Yeah. And I mean, the British system got a little bit messed up because of Thatcher.
Well, they stopped funding it, but
exactly. You know, because of conservative
politics. That only works if you actually fund it.
Yep. Yeah.
There's a lot of money to be made in that.
At its best.
My healthcare plan is Call the Midwife in the 1950s, where everyone has access to the healthcare they need in their communities, in their homes, in ways that are relationally oriented. That's my dream.
I love that show. It's one of the few shows actually that are period pieces that I like, mostly because the way they talk about disability in that show is really radically progressive, actually. But that's another thing. I actually think that something like where people again can have universal access, you know, whether it be healthcare or housing, like things that we believe to be fundamental, not only human rights, but recognizing that all people are created in the image of God. Like that, if that's our theological starting point, there's certain basics everybody should have, if that's our starting point. And to deny people those basics is to deny that you actually believe that they reflect the image of God. And that, I think, is essential for us if we are going to call ourselves progressives and call ourselves Christians. Blair, Julia, thank you for going probably 20 minutes longer than I normally want to on a podcast, but
the listeners for hanging in there with us.
Exactly.
If you're still here, bless.
No, I'm sure. Well, I'm going to put timestamps on this one so people know when to actually pop on stuff, because it's a little bit longer. So thank you for joining us for the Progressive Christians podcast. If you'd like to connect with us and be part of the conversation, you can find us on Instagram at The Progressive Christians and on TikTok at The Progressive Christians. Definitely, like I said, or leave comments on Spotify. We are going to respond to all the comments. Definitely appreciate you all who are letting your voice be known. If you like the show, please rate, review, share, subscribe. If you're on Spotify, please give us a 5-star on Spotify or or iTunes, but especially Spotify. We can get our rating back up. Thanks for listening, and we will see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.